If we talk about India and China relationship, it is woven into a complex tapestry of cooperation and competition altogether. At the same period of time, we can see cooperation happening, and in the same period of time, we can see competition between both the countries. Now, in the last many decades, the strife, the competition between India and China has been very well known throughout the world. Now, before that, the relationship between India and China was that of brotherhood, till the war which took place in 1960s devastated all of the relationship between India and China. Now, in the last 15 years, we have had multiple clashes year after year with that of China. If we start with the year 2013, we had Depsang clash. In 2015, we had Chumar clash. In 2015, we had Botsay clash. In 2017, we had Doklam standoff. In 2020, we had Galwan Valley clash. In 2022, we had Yangtze River clash. So all these clashes in the last 15 years are testimony to the fact that India and China relationship has been the relationship of ups and downs in the last many decades, especially in the last 15 years to be specific. Now, in such a situation, if any significant step is taken to improve the relationship between India and China, it altogether becomes very remarkable. Like in the recent past, there was an agreement, that is India-China border agreement, done between that of India's Prime Minister and Chinese President Xi Jinping, India's Prime Minister PM Modi, at one of the summit known as BRICS Summit, which happened in the sidelines of Kazan. Now, similarly, in the recent past, in the last few days, there have been another key development in relationship between India and China. Now, these updates have been followed by several diplomatic meetings between Vikram Misri, who's the India's foreign secretary, and several of the Chinese officials and diplomats. Now, after these several talks and rounds of meetings, some decisions have been taken, some key decisions have been taken. So first is that both countries have tried to improve their bilateral relation by including resuming of Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, which is very dear to Indians and which is part of our cultural heritage and which we feel about very dearly. And also, direct flights between India and China will be restored. Visas will be issued for the journalists and think tanks as well, and also trans-border river data between the countries would be shared. So all these key updates came after the set of recent meetings between India's foreign secretary and several Chinese officials and diplomats. Which is why it becomes very imperative and important for us to discuss what would be its impact, what are the prospects for relationship between India and China, and what are the key areas where India and China can cooperate in future. So hello, my name is Preetpal Singh and all of you are watching Perspective. Now, firstly, let us try to understand what has been India's stance in the meeting and how India has framed its response of the meeting and how China's response to the meeting has been a little bit different. Now, India's statement emphasized the review of the overall state of India-China relationship with a focus on people-centric steps first to stabilize and rebuild ties between the nations. Also, India highlighted agreed actions from the previous meeting of our PM Modi ji and President of China Xi Jinping in Kazan, conveying a very cautious and nuanced approach to the discussions. But China's approach has been a little bit different. China, on the other hand, they framed the discussions as being focused on improvement and development of the bilateral relation. Not a review, but improvement and development of the bilateral relation. You see the change in terminology, and also noting that the two sides have reached consensus on specific matters and measures. So Beijing, all in all, presented a more optimistic view of those talks, with a focus on progress and forward-looking outcomes in the near future. So this is the difference between the statements published by both the countries. Now, talking first about the revered Kailash Mansarovar Yatra. Now, the statements from both the countries, they reflect that the resumption of Kailash Mansarovar Yatra is going to happen. But the Chinese statements, they reflect more of an urgency, that this will happen as soon as possible. But India's statement clearly says that it is going to start from the year 2025, that is summer of 2025, with the discussions on modalities still taking place between the countries. So China, however, has mentioned in this that the visit would be to Xizang autonomous region of that of China, and also emphasized that discussions on agreements would be initiated as quickly as possible. Now, this is first thing. Second thing, as we discussed, is that India and China has agreed to resume flights between their countries. Now, the direct flights between both the countries, they were suspended in the year 2020 after the Galwan Valley clash and the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, before the ban was imposed or before they were suspended, the flight services, around 539 flights flew between China and India each month. And every month, the capacity of those flights was around 1.25 lakh passengers. So that was the tourist, or that was the to and fro of passengers between China and India before the year 2020. But currently there is no direct flight and they will be resumed as soon as possible. And one more interesting fact to know here is that currently only one resident journalist of India is in China, while China's journalists in India are none. So again, this will be improved in the future because visas will be given to researchers, to journalists and to think tanks. So that is second important measure. Now the third important change is in relation to trans-border river cooperation. Now India and China, they have agreed to hold an early meeting of the India-China expert level mechanism to discuss the issues related to trans-border rivers, especially which river? Brahmaputra river, and also related to the sharing of hydrological data between the countries. Now all of this follows concerns raised by India vis-a-vis and in relation to China's construction of world's largest dam on Brahmaputra river, which was cleared in January. And India has stated that this meeting will focus on a resumption of hydrological data provision and other forms of cooperation concerning trans-border rivers. And if you have to analyze these three changes or these three decisions taken between India and China, let us see India's approach to it and let us then see China's approach to it. See, India's approach to it was more of a step-by-step approach, that is ladder by ladder. And to address the areas, India wanted first the address should be of mutual interests, and also concerns particularly focusing on the border situation, because India's External Affairs Minister have already said multiple times that the border situation between India and China will define the bilateral relationship between India and China, which is why border situation for us as a country is very important for us to monitor, because it directly challenges the sovereignty and integrity of our country and integrity of our nation. So India's statement, it basically highlighted the resumption of existing dialogues and agreeing to a gradual approach in future, addressing priorities of each of the sides through the mechanisms which are in place. So that is what India's stance was in those meetings. Now coming to the China stance. Now China's stance was more of a long-term strategy, where China says that both the countries should maintain or manage relationship based on their fundamental interest of their countries and their people. Also, Chinese statement, it emphasized more on advancing exchanges, on advancing practical cooperation and constructive attitude for enhancing mutual trust and managing differences between the nations. So that is again one forward and proactive step taken by China in mending the ties. But there are several key areas which have not been touched upon this meeting. For example, the areas in relation to economic and trade concerns, that is dumping of Chinese products in India, and India imposing several duties, tariffs on Chinese products, and different other issues in relation to trade and economy have not been discussed. So that is one part. But one thing which was mentioned by China was that China mentioned that India would extend its full support for China's presidency of Shanghai Cooperation Organization (SCO) and will actively participate in the meetings under China's leadership and under China's presidency. Although in contrast, India did not comment on this in its statement. So that is one particular thing. So in all, if we have to analyze this change, one thing which we can very dearly say and very precisely say, that both the countries have been trying to mend their relation in the last 1 year. Because what we saw in the year 2024 was Indian Prime Minister and President of China meeting at the sidelines of BRICS Summit, talking to each other, and soon after that, India-China border agreement was finalized. And now these meetings between our foreign secretary and China's officials and these three key decisions being taken, it is definitely a forward step in improving the bilateral relationship between both the countries. But one question which might arise in your mind and which you might ask, or which you should ask in fact, is that can China really be trusted? Can we really trust China with all these things? Because what really happens is, on one hand, China tries to mend the relationship with India. But on the other hand, they start doing some other activities on their borders, which then India says that you're not doing right, and then clashes happen. So this has been ongoing since the last decade. But still, now these updates, they seem quite positive. But still the question remains that can China really be trusted? So if we talk in strategic terms, both Indian diplomacy and military, they remain on high alert when you talk about China. So that being said, we are very, very cautious. We are not blindly trusting any of the country, especially China. And we are closely monitoring Beijing actions across the line of actual control. That is non-negotiable, and that we will be doing in the near future as well. See, but one way through which China can begin to gain trust of India is through solving the bilateral issues, border issues, and different other issues in an amicable way. But since China is developing the world's largest dam in the lower regions of Brahmaputra river, that is serving the exact opposite purpose than mending the ties and resolution of ties or resolution of problems in an amicable way. This is doing exactly the opposite. But one thing important to note here is that Beijing and China, they have blamed Indian media a lot for portraying China negatively in their country. For example, in India, they have blamed Indian media that you portray China very negatively in India. But now it has been established, China's People Liberation Army PLA did have a confrontation along the line of actual control, where both of the sides, they lost their lives in the year 2020. That has been established, that fact has been clearly established by all. Now the question is, what does Chinese media, Chinese social media, media outlets in China, they have to think or they talk about India. What do they talk about India? See, if you go to the regular media of China, they regularly talk and put up stories on accidents, on mishaps and deaths across the country of India. So they talk negatively about India in this relation. A very little can be found on the developmental issues in India. That is on development, what is happening in India. A very little could be found in the Chinese mainstream media. And we talk about Chinese social media, at least it is less censored than the real media, the traditional media of China. The social media is less censored, but still, you will see an occasional mention only of India's economic growth, technological advancements, which is frequently overshadowed by the content which is highlighting infrastructure failures in India, pollution levels in India, or governance challenges or hygiene-related issues, sanitation-related issues, and different other issues in India. Only these issues mostly 90% of the times are highlighted in Chinese social media and Chinese mainstream media. And there have been several ill-intended attempts to portray Indian leadership also negatively in all those media outlets. Now, a few months ago, the Global Times China only, an English daily which is there in China, it carried an opinion piece on India's foreign minister, India's external affairs minister, S. Shankar. And it said that S. Shankar's diplomatic wrangling has won him some fans. However, the diplomatic strategies and tactics he led were full of tricks. This was mentioned in a Chinese daily English newspaper. And they said that they don't have the S.J. Shankar's stance or diplomacy. They don't have the moral sense of Jawaharlal Nehru or ethical sense of Indira Gandhi's diplomacy. This is what those articles said about the foreign minister, the external affairs minister of India. So to say just one thing I need to put forward over here, that Chinese media and Chinese social media, censorship is definitely there on them, but the propaganda, the agenda which is pushed over there is anti-India. That India is dirty, India is filthy, India is poor, India is devastated, India is not growing much, and all the positive things of India, they are not shown to them. They are not fed that information. And if a person is fed negative information about a particular country, the mindset of those people start becoming biased. And this is what is exactly happening with the people of China. Because the information which they are fed is not accurate or is not the complete picture. They are being fed the half-baked knowledge and half-baked picture. But doesn't matter what their media says about our external affairs minister. We stand with the sentence of our external affairs minister S.J. Shankarji that the state of border will determine the state of relationship with China. Whatever will be the state of the border will determine the state of the relationship, bilateral relationship between India and China. We till today stand by this statement. Now, while progress in diplomatic and military concerns has been seen between India and China in the last few months, but the success of this engagement between the two countries will depend on China's responsiveness to India's concerns. So China's responsiveness to these concerns will be crucial in shaping the public perception and the future relationship of both the countries. So because one thing we need to know is that goodwill and trust both are very strong elements which are required for a healthy bilateral relationship between any of the countries in the world. If these two elements are missing, bilateral relation would be strained. So the question which we were answering, that can China be trusted? The answer is both yes and no. See, we can't go ahead if we don't trust our partners, we don't trust to whom we are talking. We need to have a considerable amount of trust in what China says and what China agrees to. But still, does that mean we stop being cautious? The answer is no. We have to be cautious at the same point of time while we are trusting the Chinese in relation to these agreements which we are doing with them. But still our military establishment, our diplomatic establishment, they remain vigilant and they remain cognizant of the fact that China is known for taking U-turns. So we should not be forgetting that and we should be remembering it and taking that forward, taking the lessons which we have learned from past. We should be forming the future course of trajectory and shaping the relationship between India and China. Also, one more important thing which we need to know here is that since Donald Trump has now become the president of US, now he has been threatening China with a lot of tariffs. And maybe in future, he might impose a lot of tariffs on India as well, because he's working on a reciprocal basis. That if you impose tariff on my products, I'll impose tariff on your products. And this, if he does with both of China and India, both China and India together can maybe form a bloc or can maybe negotiate with US in a better way to ensure that these tariffs are reduced or done away with. In short, what I'm trying to say is that India and China currently they face a common challenge, and how to enhance their bargaining power amongst that challenge in front of that challenge with the US, that is the question both of the countries should put forward amongst themselves. So the last point being that India and China relationship would thrive on structural issues like economic needs, military realities, and political worries over the US imposing tariffs on India and China. If these pillars are taken into consideration by both the countries and given much due diligence and importance, India and China can cooperate better and compete in a better way, so that intricate woven relationship between India and China, which is mired by cooperation and competition, it keeps on still in the future, but there shouldn't be skirmishes at the border which will challenge India's sovereignty and integrity. This shouldn't happen, and on a positive note, our relationship should go forward, while us being vigilant and us being cognizant of several facts about China. Now, what are your views as to what we can do to improve our relationship with China? Please let me know in the comment section. I'll be very happy to read them. All the very best. Have a very beautiful day. Thank you.